Our guest today has focused his public service on restoring ethics and fairness to state government. Ladies and gentlemen, the governor of the state of Illinois, Patrick Quinn. Governor Quinn.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank the City Club and all the sponsors of today's breakfast. It's a very impressive group, and we're honored to have a very special man here. I've been with Patrick Kennedy on a couple of other occasions when he speaks from his heart about a very important subject for Illinois and for America. The Kennedy Forum on Community Mental Health is a very important mission. It's his mission, Patrick Kennedy's mission of a lifetime. And I think it is something we all want to hear today, take to our hearts and do something about it. As Jay mentioned, we are working closely on a permanent site for the Special Olympics right here in Chicago. Many years ago, in 1968, there's someone here who was present, Alderman Ed Burke, but when we began the Special Olympics movement, but Ann Burke, Justice Ann Burke, his wife, as well as the Kennedy family, have worked on the whole issue of Special Olympics over almost half a century. And I think that particular example of how people came together and worked together on behalf of those with intellectual disabilities is a very important, reminder or model for all of us dealing with the issues of and challenges of mental health. We have to devote resources in this area from our government. I proposed a budget earlier this year that puts millions of dollars more into our efforts on mental health across Illinois, especially community mental health. I think it's very, very important that we really see some examples that have happened in America over the half century since 1968 and apply those examples to important missions of today. I personally want to thank my good friend who is devoted to this cause, who works tirelessly to make sure that all of us know about the important challenges and issues that community mental health pose to all of us. And I want to thank Pete O'Brien for being here. Thank you very much. Your good work, Pete. And in closing, I want to acknowledge my partner. I have worked since I become governor, and she is the president of our county board here in Cook County, the largest county in Illinois, larger than most states across America, and that's Toni Preckwinkle. Thank you, Toni. Thanks to Toni Preckwinkle and literally thousands of people across Illinois, in less than a year, we've enrolled 661,000 people in health care coverage, including mental health care coverage, in our state due to the Affordable Care Act. And I know we're going to hear from Patrick Kennedy about how important it is to make sure that we cover everyone. And without further ado, I'll turn the platform back over to Jay Doherty. Okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, who in the world would have thought that I could say this right now? May I introduce the former President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. How about a round of applause?
Good morning. I am Robert Lincoln. This is my mother, Mary.
Good morning. We are pleased to join you here in Chicago today.
We were last in your fair city when the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum and the Illinois Supreme Court Historic Preservation Commission presented the insanity retrial of Mary Todd Lincoln.
At that event and at a subsequent event in Springfield, the audience served as the jurors while attorneys questioned us, following procedures and laws of your time.
The complexity of our case was underscored when one jury concurred with the court's decision in 1875 and found my mother to be insane and placed her under my supervision,
while the other jury dismissed the petition and found me to be sane and capable of minding my own decisions.
Now, if you have heard any detailed account of the occurrences which forced me to place my mother under care, I think, indeed I know, You cannot but have approved my action. 6 physicians in council informed me that by longer delay, I was making myself morally responsible for some very probable tragedy which might occur at any moment. My mother is, I think, under as good care and as happily situated as is possible given the circumstances. The responsibility that is now and has been on me is one that I would gladly share if it was possible to do so, but being alone as I am, I can only do my duty as it is given me to see it, trusting I am guided for the best.
It does not appear that God is good to have placed me in this situation. I endeavor to read my Bible and put up my petitions 3 times a day, but my afflicted heart fails me, and my voice often falters in prayer. I have worshipped my son, and no unpleasant word has ever passed between us, yet I cannot understand why I should have been deprived of my freedom.
My dear mother, you must trust that I can and will do everything that is for your good, and you must not allow yourself to think otherwise. For in that way you will only retard the recovery that I am looking for.
My heart fails me when I think of the difference between yourself and my noble, glorious husband. The only trouble about me and all of my sorrows and bereavement has been that my mind has always been too keen in the midst of all my griefs.
I have not allowed my mother's anger at me to have any effect upon me other than the regret that she should so feel and express herself to me. I hold on to hope that the time will come when your great animosity towards me will cease, and I am very anxious that it should.
Robert and I reconciled our estrangement, and I was able to enjoy my granddaughter Mamie in my final years. I continued to suffer from numerous ailments, including chronic inflammation of the spine, migraine headaches, and a loss of sight, as well as a great mental depression.
And sadly, my mother's ongoing struggles were constantly the subject of speculation, reporting, and gossip in the national newspapers.
During the trial, the papers had written extended articles feeding the public's interest in the sad details of my struggles and the distress of my family.
While many sensationalized the topic and attributed untoward motives to my actions, in the aftermath of the trial, the Chicago Times of May 23, 1875, included an editorial which expressed some sympathy for my mother and our difficult circumstances.
The saddest story of the week has been the disclosure to the public of Mrs. Lincoln's mental aberration.
The report of the legal steps reluctantly taken to adjudge her insane, the testimony conclusively showing a disordered mind, the finding of the jury, the final removal to a private asylum for the insane, have made a story of melancholy interest on which it is not pleasant to linger.
It is gratifying, however, to know that at a time when her faculties were playing her false, that the only one of her name left to counsel and protect her discharged his delicate and unhappy task with a filial thoughtfulness.
Noticing something peculiar and eccentric in the conduct of the woman, our country forgot that she had suffered as few women are called upon to suffer. Forgot the charity that her husband had begged for all, and jested, sneered, and laughed at her waywardness without doing her the justice as to inquire as to its cause. Yet all the while she was mad. By no code, human or divine, was she responsible for her conduct. Who is there now to breathe one unkind word of the woman who the law now consigns to the restraints of a madhouse?
The world needs a lesson to give it pause. It handles too lightly the reputation of its people. Gossip has too wide a thoughtless range. Slander, too free a course. The world needs to think how easily a soap bubble in the summer sun, a good name may be blasted, and how impossible it is to restore its rounded beauty.
The lesson in Mrs. Lincoln's case should be taken to heart. The safest rule is never to pass judgment upon the testimony offered by appearance, which may be explained, or suspicions which reflection will suggest are unreasonable. The better way is to pass no judgment at all. From on the tomb of Abraham Lincoln, as from out the cell of Abraham Lincoln's widow at her asylum, comes to the whole world the lesson of charity for all and malice toward none.
Next spring will mark 150 years next spring 150 years will have passed since the conclusion of that trial and the publication of that editorial. Science and society have progressed in many ways.
Improvements have been made in the diagnosis and treatment of mental illnesses.
But sadly, the concerns of the author of that editorial still resonate today. The stigma surrounding mental illness remains potent, continuing to discourage sufferers from seeking treatment, making it difficult for family members to risk public embarrassment and notoriety in order to secure assistance for their loved ones.
Your engagement through the Kennedy Forum promises new progress in removing the stigma surrounding mental illnesses and providing dignity and support for those families who have, like the Lincolns and many other families, struggled with mental illnesses, intellectual disabilities, and addictions.
We thank you for your attention to this most important initiative. Thank you.
Our guest today is the author and lead sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008. This dramatic piece of legislation provides tens of millions of Americans who were previously denied care with access to mental health treatment. He is the founder of the Kennedy Forum on Mental Health, which served as a vehicle to celebrate the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's signing of the Community Mental Health Act. Our guest today is the youngest member of the Kennedy family to hold elective office when, at age 21, he served in the Rhode Island State House. From there, he served in the United States Congress from 1995 to 2011. On a personal note, our guest today has the best qualities of his father, Senator Ted Kennedy: enormous loyalty, heartfelt gratitude, and a tireless work ethic, and his mother, Joan, quiet compassion and a kind heart. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Kennedy. Patrick.
All right. No big deal. Thank you, Jay Doherty. Don't you love the way Jay Doherty fights for a cause? God bless you, Jay. No sooner than when the governor sat down, he was right on him. Now, that permanent place for Special Olympics, we got to get it done. We and my family have been blessed to have people like Jay Doherty there to help us get things done. And here in Chicago, the list of people are too numerous to mention who have been so helpful to my family over the years. And of course, I would never have been able to run for office at the ripe age of 21 to the State House, and then having been elected to the United States Congress at 27 as the youngest member of Congress, but for the fact it was my good looks and personality that got me over. It had nothing to do with my last name being Kennedy whatsoever. So I've always held a debt of gratitude to all of you who have helped really burnish what my family's legacy has meant to millions of Americans. And people like the Burkes and Justice Burke, who was responsible for this presentation that you saw this morning, is in chambers doing her job as your Supreme Court Justice this morning. Thank her and in her absence, Alderman Burke, for all the help he's been in helping us to organize this event. And I want to get into the other committee members, but let me just say the purpose of this is to carry on that same Kennedy legacy that was started nearly 50 years ago by my Aunt Eunice Shriver when she started the Special Olympics out here in Soldiers Field. And can you imagine now Special Olympics is in 187 countries in the world, that the fastest growing Special Olympics games are in China, the Middle East, and Africa. And think about what that's done to transform attitudes towards those with intellectual disabilities. So I just want to put this in context. I am humbled to be part of a family and to be part of so many, like many of you, who've been marching on this march towards progress. I'm so honored that the governor of this state not only is here this morning, but has been there behind the scenes throughout this process to help us get this moving, because he knows this is a national issue, which is what I'm going to set the context for this morning in my remarks, but that with the Kennedy Forum Illinois, Illinois has an opportunity to organize itself with all its distinguished elected officials and its administration officials who are here today towards the task of achieving what John F. Kennedy said in 1963. And I don't think I found anywhere in any speech a greater summation of the challenge that we have in this country in tackling the issues of mental health than what President Kennedy said 50 years ago last October. And he said, the mentally ill need no longer be alien to our affections or beyond the help of our communities. And what he was saying is, the mentally ill need to be all of us. All of us have a responsibility because it is all of us, as indicated by this performance. It reaches to every family in America from all walks of life, from the president on down. Every family is touched by those in their midst who have a mental illness, an intellectual disability, or a substance use disorder. And the irony is my Aunt Rosemary, who really was the impetus for her brother, President Kennedy's, really taking the lead on the Community Mental Health Act of 1963, was duly diagnosed with both an intellectual disability and a mental illness. But if you can imagine it, mental illness was more stigmatized than what was then called mental retardation. So just to give you a sense about history and how we make progress. Now, it's so fitting that this program started with the Lincolns, because you think about President Lincoln and freeing the slaves. And then it took over 100 years for us to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Why would it have taken us so long? It's not as if we didn't understand we're all children of God. There's nothing that separates us. And yet this age-old prejudice and stigma, simply because of the color of their skin, really forced many Americans to feel left out and marginalized because of the discrimination and racism embedded in our laws and regulations in this country. President Kennedy was the first president to address the issue of civil rights on national television. And I think what he said in that address also is very telling for what we need to do in the cause of this new civil rights struggle for those who are marginalized because their illness is an illness of the brain, just as immutable as the color of their skin, forcing them to be ostracized and discriminated in our society. And President Kennedy said, "Who amongst us would trade the color of their skin and be content with those who counsel patience and delay?" In other words, if you don't think it's a big deal that people in this country are systematically discriminated against simply because of their appearance and the color of their skin, try walking a mile in their shoes and see how it feels. And then say that it's all right to wait 5, 10, 15 years for civil rights. Because that's what most people were cautioning back in '63. They said, John Kennedy, this is going too fast, wait longer. We'll never forget Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And today, we are faced with a similar moment in time because there are many in this country who said, we don't need to rush to save our brothers and sisters from brain illnesses because stigma is strong. It's easy to ignore them. They don't have any power. It's not worth our time and energy. And furthermore, we can't do anything about these illnesses. That's the same attitude that faced this country back in 1963. And yet we stand on the doorstep of a time to make the same momentous progress in advancing the cause of this new civil rights struggle for those with brain illnesses. And I want to tell you the reason I'm here today is none other than the incredible leadership of Peter and Mimi O'Brien, who were so crucial in making sure that they brought us all here today. And And they want to do here in Illinois what we're trying to do on the national level and marry the challenges that we're facing nationally with the ones that we're going to face here in Illinois. So let me give you just a quick synopsis of the context of what I hope this Kennedy Forum is going to do. And before I do, I'd like to first ask the organizing members of the forum here in Illinois to please stand. We have Mark Ishog and Eileen Durkin, and can everybody please stand? Diane Swank and Lawrence M. Small and Rep. Sarah Feigenholtz, Senator Terry Garotti, Dr. Lori Jones. They are taking this on locally, but they can't do it alone. They need all of your help. And Peter and Mimi yesterday committed over $100,000 to make this a kickoff event. And I want to tell you, I spent 16 years in Congress. I can count the number of people who ever donated to me because I was the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. Can count them. This is not an area of philanthropy most people embrace. All of us know that. We address mental illness issues, but we address them through all kinds of easier to digest terms. Children's health, housing, supportive services. Those are all euphemisms for what the heart of the problem is, and that's we're not addressing their brain health, them as a whole person. So what Peter and Mimi are doing by stepping up is trying to not only advance all the services that are all there for those with mental illness that need to be increased and supported, but they're also advancing the notion that we need to have a conversation about this. And you are all in the room because many of you are new invitees to this conversation. This conversation cannot be just amongst those who have a particular interest in the treatment field or in the science or in the insurance field. This involves all of us. And that's why this Kennedy Forum Illinois is so unique in that respect. So I became the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act by accident. So those of you who know politics, none more than the governor, knows that when you want to be a champion of anything, or the senator, you got to wait around, or Alderman Burke. You got to wait around a long time before you get that gray hair and seniority to be the guy that gets to be the one to offer a popular bill. Because Skinny, everybody wants the credit, but not everyone can get it because they got to wait around and wait their turn. So you can imagine what mental health stigma is like when I get to the Congress as the youngest member of Congress from the smallest state in the country and in the minority party. You know what that means, Ed? I am in the lowest of the low on the totem pole. And yet, when I asked, could I co-sponsor parity, thinking that I'd be number 286 on the list of co-sponsors, I went over to the clerk of the House and they said, Congressman, if you want to be the primary sponsor, we don't have anyone else here who wants to take it on. And so, of course, I learned a big lesson about the politics of mental health. You see, most members of Congress don't want the words mental health and addiction right after their name. They feel a little vulnerable as it is to then have to answer for, why are you so passionate about this issue? So fast forward, when we got the bill passed, it wasn't because everyone had this wellspring of, wouldn't it be great if we all treated each other with dignity and respect, irrespective of our illnesses? It was passed because my dad, who was recuperating from brain surgery, had his replacement on the health committee be this guy named Chris Dodd. And you may recall Chris Dodd wasn't so famous for his role on the health committee as on the banking committee. Now, here comes 2008, and something may have happened, you recall. The stock market dropped out from underneath us. And the Congress failed to vote for this thing called the TARP, Toxic Asset Relief Program. Stock market dropped another 6,000 points in 15 minutes when the Congress didn't vote for that. And so everybody said, well, we're going to have to pass it next week or else the economy is going to go into another Great Depression. So, of course, we came back the next week, and I knew we had this parity law sitting on the desk in the Senate. We had passed it in the House, that once the TARP bill passed, Congress was going to run home and run for re-election, which means that we weren't going to get the bill passed and we would have had to start the whole process over. And so I called my dad because, of course, who was better than my dad for getting anything done? So my dad, of course, saved me again. And he called Chris Dodd and he said, can you do something on this, Chris? Because I got just the idea. I'll put the $800 billion bailout for our nation's top banks on H.R. 1424, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And you know what happened? Our parity bill passed. So, Governor, you know what? Sometimes it takes whatever it takes. And thank God we've got a governor who's willing to do whatever it takes to advance social justice for people in very difficult times. And so that is the story. And why do I say it? Because most Americans don't know it is the law of the land. That insurance companies and even the federal government, who's the largest payer of health care, has now to live under the law which says that we must, under law, treat illnesses of the brain like any other illnesses of the body. So in the law, just to be not too technical, but it says if you're inpatient in-network, outpatient in-network, inpatient out-of-network, outpatient out-of-network, pharmacy benefits and ER benefits. If you get treated for diabetes in primary care settings, secondary care, and tertiary care settings, you need to be treated for addiction and mental illness in those primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of care in the same way that you would, in an analogous way, to medical and surgical coverage, which means that today we don't pay for mental health care, if you were to compare it to cancer, until it's stage 4 cancer. That's when we come in and say, oh, we better try to fix this problem. If you were to compare how we pay for mental illness and addiction towards diabetes, you'd basically be saying, we have to wait until you have your legs amputated or you go blind before we treat you. That's how we treat the mentally ill and those with substance use disorders today. What we ought to be doing as a nation is treating them the same way. Now, I've been taking Lipitor for 15 years, and they tell me it's to try to keep me from suffering from a stroke in 20 years. Now, what is it about our healthcare system that worries so much about me dying of a stroke in 20 years? That is less concerned with the illness that's really going to kill me, and that's my mood disorder and addiction, because if anything's going to take me out, that's the illness. And yet, when I went into my primary care doc no more than 6 months ago for my first appointment with my new doc, I told him I was in recovery from addiction and mental illness, and I had asthma, and I took, Nexium and Lipitor. And the doctor proceeded to ask me 20 questions about my asthma and whether it affected my sleep and how many times I used my fast-acting inhaler and all the rest. And not one question about my mood disorder or addiction and how I was working on treating that. And so on the way out of the office, I said, hey, Doc, you saw that I had a spine surgery that still comes back every once in a while, chronic pain. Could you prescribe me some Oxycontin, about 100 pills would be fine. 80 milligrams would do it, just, for the breakthrough pain. And he literally got his prescription pad out and was ready to write it out for me. And then he stopped me and said, hey, didn't you tell me you were in recovery? And I said, yeah. And it's now that you're asking me about it, I'm just giving you an anecdote to how this affects all of us in our lives. And the consequences of this kind of systemic neglect of screening early for mood disorders, they look at my Irish face, Governor. I don't know if the dermatologist likes you, Jay Doherty. I'm sure they love you. And definitely Peter O'Brien. And any of his O'Brien family members, just forget about it. High dermatology cost. But, if you ask for a family history, I've got cancer and all the rest. But no one has ever asked for a family history of mental illness and addiction. My grandmother on my mother's side died alone after a week. No one had found her because she was so isolated because of her illness. She had fallen, and it was because of her alcoholism, which was secondary to her mood disorder, which my mother suffers from, which I've inherited. And my dad, who had the most traumatic events that anyone could witness in their lives of having their siblings murdered in such a violent way and having to live the repeated horror of those tragedies, and affected at a time when we didn't know what post-traumatic stress was. And that the two of them were like, their mental health was left out of the equation by the medical profession, when it could have made an enormous difference in both of their lives earlier on, and by the way, in my life and my sister and brother's life, if they had adequately been taken care of early for those illnesses. So these illnesses are environmentally caused and they're biologically based. And the same as cancer, the same as diabetes. And why in this country we don't have a system of care in place to treat these illnesses like the others. Final point is early intervention works like for these illnesses just like any other illness. If you interceded first onset of schizophrenia, if you do screening, brief intervention, referral and treatment for those with addiction early on, you dramatically change the trajectory of the illnesses that those people end up suffering because you intervene early, just like it would be in any other illness. So the question for our society is, what are we going to do to implement the system we know we need in order to treat these illnesses, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it saves money. So this is a perfect win-win. The only other reason I got Parity Pass is because the best mental health benefits were offered by Fortune 100 companies who all supported our parity law. And why did Fortune 100 companies support it? Because they knew it was an investment in their workers and their workers' productivity. It was also an investment in reducing disability on the workplace. Huge costs to employers in Illinois and around the country. So this is an issue for everyone on the spectrum, those who are fortunate enough to have a job and work and be productive, but it may not be as productive as they otherwise would if they hadn't been denied treatment for a mental illness or addiction, and those who have serious mental illnesses. And finally, it's also a challenge for our nation's heroes. So today is 9/11, the anniversary of 9/11. It's important for us to recognize the whole war on terror is predicated on psychological warfare. The whole intent of the terrorists was to take us down mentally, if you think about it. It was to so shock us by taking down those Twin Towers that we would collapse as a society and as an economy. The best way to fight terror is to make sure we build resiliency. And yet that's frankly not part of any of our Homeland Security program. And the best way to save those who fought for us and are coming home today from war in Iraq and Afghanistan is to treat the invisible wounds of war. And I believe there's going to be consensus on this issue. It's not going to be the kind of polarizing issue that it is today if we rally around our nation's heroes, because too many of our veterans are ending up in Cook County Jail and in jails all over the country because of their untreated invisible wounds of war. And the last thing we ought to be doing to our nation's heroes is opening up the jailhouse door after they fought for our freedom to protect us from another terror attack coming on our shores. And the best thing we know how to do in this country is to say, we're going to lock you up because we think what you have is a behavioral problem, because you act out, not understanding that their behavior is a symptom of their brain, not understanding that they're So I would be happy to answer some questions now about how we're going to move forward. But suffice it to say, we're going to put together a toolkit, because no one knows what parity is. We need to put a toolkit together for consumers, and what your support for the Kennedy Forum will bring is an opportunity for us to make that toolkit accessible for people here in Illinois. And what that toolkit will do is to help them file appeals if they feel they're being wrongly denied health care simply because their illness is an illness of the brain. And they need to know the law, and they need to know how to apply the law so when they file an appeal with their insurance carrier or the government, that has the strength of factual basis. We also need a toolkit for employers to know when they're buying a health plan, what to be looking for and how to integrate the employee assistance programs with their health insurance plans. We also need a toolkit for those who are prosecutors and people in ability to enforce the law, how to enforce the law. So all of this is about, like, if you were to make the analogy to the Civil Rights Act, how do we pass the second iterations of civil rights, the voting rights, the fair housing, the fair employment? That's going to be our challenge. And that's why we need your help to inaugurate the Kennedy Forum Chicago, which Peter is committed to getting going, and the event in November 13th. And by the way, all of you are sitting on packets where they're right in front of you. That event on November 13th is going to be the kickoff of an ongoing discussion. So what we really need to do is, assign people where they would like to be involved in helping to, implement the parity law and end discrimination, whether it's in their workplace, whether it's in their community, or whether it's in their city or state. How they can give support to the governor and his initiatives, and to the alderman and his initiatives. So that's the whole point of this. So we need to add your name to our campaign, because as Jay knows from running these Kennedy campaigns like Jack George, you need a lot of people out there to get the votes out, and so to speak. It's just like politics. We need your energy and your involvement in order to be successful in this effort. So with that, I'm really pleased that all of you are here today, and I thank Paul for welcoming us.
We got a couple of questions. If you had, there are things on your tables. If you have question forms, City Club P is over here. Or else, if you're way back there and you have a good loud voice, yell it out. Any questions? I mean, obviously our speaker, didn't have much charisma and much oratory ability. I mean, we'll just let that pass. It's amazing, isn't it? All right. Yell. Who are you? You got to identify yourself.
My name is Rakuma Davis, and I work with my brother actually started the physician studying his own practice, and mental health is one of the areas that he's partly working on, really looking at starting an initiative around that for lowering PTSD. My question is around physicians. So what about a toolkit for physicians? I think they're the first line, a lot of times, especially with children, and oftentimes I think in the physicians that I know, especially my brother, his response is, well, we're not qualified necessarily to be diagnosed.
Well, I can see you're going to lead that committee for us. We do need a toolkit for physicians. They're in the process of developing toolkits. We need to apply it here in Illinois. You need to add continuing education requirements here in Illinois to all of your providers, nurse practitioners, nurses, physicians, everybody, because this affects everybody. And the person's coming in with a broken leg or coming in for women's health, and if they're not asking about sexual trauma or domestic violence, they're leaving out half the picture. And kids, we know all of these illnesses often really manifest themselves early on, and being able to identify those things early is critical to saving costs down the line and not only saving lives. So fantastic. Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else out there in the, just stand up. Identify yourself and speak very loud.
My name is Renee Popovits. I'm with the law firm of Popovits and Robinson, and I would just like to thank you for your leadership and acknowledge that Governor Quinn has passed one of the strongest parity laws in the state of Illinois in August of 2011. And in conjunction with IATA and the Department of Human Services, we've actually put together a consumer bill of rights that we'd be happy to share with you. It would be very helpful for your purity toolkit. We'll work with you on that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. That's terrific. So all this is about literacy. We need people to understand these issues. And so employers could be a big help to this, in addition to civic leaders, just making sure their organizations know about their consumer rights, like you've just talked about. So that would be one of the functions of this Illinois Kennedy Forum, is to apply some of the materials that are being developed nationally to the physicians community here, apply some of the work you've done already in terms of consumer rights to enforce the governor and the legislature's law, because these are laws. I'm happy to say I'm the author of the law, but it isn't worth anything if we don't implement the law and we don't enforce the law. And if people first don't know there's a law, then they're not going to appeal, which is not going to drive any action to enforce and really implement the law. Yes?
My name is Brenda Wolf, and I'm from Lardon Children's Hospital here in Chicago. The fear of providers that are on the, if the primary care providers is there aren't enough providers in the community to possibly serve the individuals who are identified. And so it's great to have parity, but there really needs to also be attention in expanding the network of providers to serve individuals who have been diagnosed. So that's a huge problem in the healthcare field, not just here in Illinois, but throughout the country.
Excellent point. So the biggest problem we're going to still have is these phantom networks. So people are listed on the sheet as being providers, but they're not like actually active. Or it takes you 6 weeks to try to get an appointment. If you're lucky, you get one. So from the employer side, if you're working and your son or daughter has a mental illness or substance use disorder and you can't get an assessment in 6 weeks, you're offline. So this is crucial to employers. It's crucial to all of us. And I really think that by forcing this evaluation, we want to kind of create this J.D. Powers of mental health, where we evaluate compliance. And if you are an individual seeking care and you're not being given access in a timely way, the same way you would if you had a broken leg or anything else, then that is a parity violation. And so I agree with you, the parity law doesn't accomplish the additional dollars, but it's the vehicle to force those dollars to be appropriated. And then if we can get these Milliman studies and PricewaterhouseCoopers, who are all showing that investment in mental health reduces the comorbidities of obesity, of cardiovascular disease, of all of the heart disease and cancer. You go down the line, this is not new dollars. It's reappropriating dollars that are currently going to treating people and their pathologies, to preventing and preempting these pathologies from happening, because you treat the early onset of these illnesses. And The key here is also in the criminal justice system. You're spending, umpteen dollars trying to have all these people recidivate all the time in Cook County Jail, which is the largest mental health institution in one location in the country. When, imagine what you could do if you had better intensive case management for those folks so they didn't end up back in the jail, which you're all paying for. So I think there's savings. The problem is here, people say, oh, it's not going to happen, it costs money. It's costing us money not to do this, and we have the data. IBM is at the forefront of showing all of the ancillary costs in our system, from juvenile justice to additional workforce training and housing dollars and social services. You add all those up, and all of a sudden people are going to say, wait, this is not a hard question to answer. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The problem is we're not investing in that ounce of prevention for the same reasons you say, because the dollars have never followed where the need is and the demonstration of where the return on investment is.
One more. I'm working the room for you. If you need help. One more, yes, stand up.
I wonder if the tool of telehealth also medicine, especially for rural areas, for people in prison and others, we should know.
There are all kinds of new technologies that are going to be applied in this area of delivery of services, and telehealth has been demonstrated in many studies to be very effective. But like all of these things, what the Kennedy Forum wants to do is not only measure compliance, they want to promote best practices. So a big problem in the field is we've never had the kind of impetus to really take those best practices and bring them to scale. So I am blessed because I go around the country, I hear all these brilliant people tell me about this intervention, that intervention. But there's pockets of excellence. What we need to do is bring those to scale, because if you combine some telehealth with some remote monitoring, with some facilitating, some peer support, and some medicines if necessary, and supportive housing. It just depends on what the individual's needs are. That's the magic. Instead, what we do is you say, oh, did we give you a pill? Oh, that's treatment, check the box, and then you go home. That's not mental health treatment, is giving them a pill. It's supporting them and helping them get back to a productive life.
Okay,
Yes, there's one moment.
He really needs my help, does he? Last question.
Your willingness to bring in the criminal justice system to the whole process. I'm a criminal court judge at 26th Street, and on Fridays we do a treatment court. One of the things that we need is to include all of the treatment services. The Health Care Act has helped us with that, and you've mentioned toolkits. Are there sign-up committees for each of these toolkits so we can advance this work?
Thank you, because you just put the charge out to the committee to come up with that, those organizing committees. And so if everyone would make sure you've all signed in coming in here so we know who you are. And of course, Jay already knows where you live. But we do really need you involved. As I said, November 13th is just the kickoff. It's not the end, it's just the beginning of this forum in Illinois. And we'd all be so grateful if you could help us out in any way that you could find in spreading the word and helping us. There's a lot to do, needless to say, and we need everybody. This really, the telltale of this is it takes all of us to address this challenge, not just some of us. So I hope all of us work on it. Thank you.